ICCM Conversations, Health Musicking, exploring the boundary lines of practice on the continuum between music therapy and community music.
Welcome everybody, lovely to see you all on the call. We're going to start with what I'd like to invite Elizabeth Mitchell from Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, to open this call by offering an acknowledgement. Can I pass over to you please, Elizabeth?
So my name is Elizabeth Mitchell. Thank you for the patience as I navigated Zoom there for a moment. And I just wanted to take this moment to acknowledge the land on which I work. And I know there are a number of people from Canada on this call as well, and likely other folks from North America. Wilfrid Laurier University, which is on land today known as Waterloo, Ontario, is located on the shared traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And this land is a part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, and symbolizes the agreement to share, protect our resources, and not engage in conflict. From the Haldimand Proclamation of October 25th, 1784, this territory is described as 6 miles deep from each side of the Grand River, beginning at Lake Erie and extending in the proportion to the head of said river, which them and their posterity are to enjoy forever. And on the left side of the screen, there is a map that shows a portion of southern Ontario with the Haldimand Tract outlined. And this proclamation was signed by the British with their allies, the Six Nations, after the American Revolution. And despite being the largest reserve demographically in Canada, those nations now reside on less than 5% of that original territory. And that's the area that's filled in on the map in red. And so from a Canadian perspective, these topics of music therapy and community music are intertwined with reconciliation. So I'm aware that the profession that I belong to doesn't reflect all Canadians in terms of the demographic of music therapists in practice, the music we use in our sessions, and the ways that we train our students to work with others. And I'm also heartened by the increasing awareness of and genuine investment in the work that needs to be done so that our practices can be inclusive, can work towards justice, and can celebrate all musics and all communities. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much, Liz, for opening up with the acknowledgement, and thank you to Elizabeth, and thank you to Elise Murphy for sharing that wonderful audio track from Music Action International. I'm really delighted to see so many of you on the call, so many new people, and so many people that have joined us before or presented before, and we're delighted to have Catherine Birch here at York St John University, Elizabeth Mitchell, Elise Murphy, Emmanuela Yogolelo, and Stuart Wood today, sharing their perspectives on the continuum between health music, I'm a bit tongue-tied today, community music and music therapy. Thank you. This is contributing to many conversations that we've had through the ICCM online events, where we've been considering community music and its intersections with other fields such as ethnography and education. And I'm really excited for the rich conversation that will happen today as you share your perspectives from your different roles as music facilitators, community musicians, and music therapists. But I think that's enough from me, except to say thank you so much to the full and wonderful team for being here today. And I'm going to hand over.
Okay. Hi everybody, my name is Elise Murphy. Really happy to be here. I think it's a really important event. I think the discussions that we can have between all different people from different backgrounds with different experiences about how we work with music and with people is really important. There's loads to learn. Just want to say a little bit about my background. So I'm a musician, and I started an organisation called Music Action International in 2010. Before that, my first job had been working for War Child in Bosnia-Herzegovina in the post-conflict sort of 3 or 4 years after the war there, and was working with children in a schools project with a local team. And it was there was a music therapy department and an orchestra there as well. And we looked at ways of kind of connecting those together. And that I guess, was the starting point of seeing how what learnings and what important things can happen between different peoples collaborating. So I lived out there for about 2 years and learned so much from the local team that I worked with, particularly everything from sort of how to work with children with trauma to culture appropriation to the sort of impact of NGOs and how much local impact was listened to or not. And those, all these things were really, really important in the way that shaping the way that I then sort of went on to set up the organisation that we do now. So Music Action International designs and delivers creative music programmes with survivors of war, torture and persecution. So in this country, it's refugees and asylum seekers, but we also do projects in Sierra Leone, in Georgia, Palestine, and in Bosnia as well. The methodology was inspired by these young people in Bosnia, but it's been kind of developed with input from refugees, asylum seekers, from music therapists, from clinical therapists, teachers, academics. It's really been a collaborative process to get to the methodology that we're at now. So most of the methodology that we use is very similar, but it changes depending on the context. And one of the projects which Emmanuela is going to talk about a little bit more, and it's the music that you've just heard, is Stone Flowers, working with survivors of torture. And that was developed specifically with clinical therapists, with musicians, and musicians with lived experience as well. And yeah, I'm really happy to have this chance to kind of hear lots of different perspectives. I think what we're really interested in, the learnings that we had, particularly around working with traumatized groups, which obviously not every group that musicians work with has that, a background of trauma, but when it is groups that perhaps have trauma or definitely have trauma, it's looking at what's our responsibility to make sure we don't re-traumatize, what training is needed, actually when people, maybe we shouldn't be involved in that project without, the clinical support needed, and also the wellbeing support of the team that deliver those programs as well, and how that can impact on them. So that's it from me. Really look forward to hearing from you all, and I'll hand over to Emmanuela now.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Emmanuela Yogolelo. I'm a singer-songwriter, storyteller, music facilitator, and producer. I've been delivering music workshops to survivors of torture and other people suffering from post-traumatic disorders for nearly 10, 11 years now. I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I came to the UK over 70 years ago. I left my country during the times of wars and armed conflicts in Congo. And before I left, I had witnessed and also experienced personally some of the atrocities of wars and armed conflicts. And so when I became a music facilitator here in the UK, I guess I was what today they call a lived experience person, because I shared similar background with participants I delivered to my workshops. Myself, I was an immigrant. I had survived trauma, and I guess at first I didn't have, it's not I guess that's a fact. At first I was just, I had no training around trauma awareness. So I was doing music, I guess, like most musicians will start out first, just out of compassion, and because we believe, we are convinced we can do more with music. We can also use music to support people in different ways, including supporting survivors of tortures or just people suffering from trauma, post-traumatic disorders. So as a lived experience musician and facilitator, intuitively, it was just natural and easy for me to be kind of in the shoes of participants and understand, for example, what they might expect to get out of a workshop or an overall project, how they might want to work with musicians, facilitators, and the overall team. And during debriefing sessions, or during evaluations, planning and designing projects and workshops, I'll feed back these thoughts, wishes to the artistic team, so that we can include that in designing our project, our workshop. But also, I guess because they saw in me themselves, sometimes they felt more open with me. They felt they can trust me. So there are things they could have told Liz directly, but for some reasons, maybe because they knew I was also an asylum seeker, I was a refugee, I came from a country with wars and armed conflict, they felt naturally easy just to communicate things to me. Then I'll feed it back to the whole team, and we'll take those things into account when we improving on our program, we designing our project. And like Liz said, over the time, we had that opportunity to be trained around trauma awareness, and basically just how to better work with participants who have experienced, who are suffering from trauma or post-traumatic disorder. But I personally, in my opinion, definitely it's a good thing to be trained around trauma awareness and kind of music therapy. But deep down, I think what is something else that is equally important, it just, like I was saying, work with them with this belief and conviction that you're there for them, you're there to support them, maybe because at this time, at this moment, at this time, you are more fortunate than them, or maybe you can effectively assist them, because sometimes it didn't really matter the quality of music, because most of them were not there to become professional musicians or for professional music. It was just for the opportunities that music creates. It was just for the ability of music to connect people when they realize, because after you've been tortured, when you've lived atrocities of war, sometimes you lose trust in people. You struggle even to express yourself, to trust people, to believe in things, to really be part of the community again. But when you realize that there are people who are still nice, there are people who still understand, they can understand me, they listen to me, they are willing to work with me, to support me, they start learning again to trust, and then they reintegrate society and so on. So they might not, even when we say music help to reduce levels of stress or anxiety, they don't understand it in these terms, but they just know that music make them feel a little bit better, because it's an opportunity for once to leave your four walls at home. All the time you inside, locked on yourself, but music creates this opportunity to go outside, to have fresh air, to meet people who can become friends, people who understand what you've been through, people who believe you can make it too. People, then they start learning again to express themselves, to talk about things maybe they felt they will never be able to talk about. So I think that's what I can really say about the project I've been involved in. Maybe I've talked bish-bosh, but yeah, in few words and in summary, that's what I can share with you at this moment. Thank you.
Emmanuela and Elise, thank you so much for opening up the conversation in that way and in that tone. I'm going to share my screen. I have unmuted myself, so I'm being a good boy, but here's a change of gear. Let's put it like that, because I'm going to tell you all something briefly about where I'm coming from. And I'm going to start my stopwatch. So yeah, here's a change of gear. Here's my biography. We're here talking about professional practice. So here are 4 bullet points about me as an introduction to catch you up in the last 21 years of my professional life. I trained as a music therapist in the late 90s in London. And since then, pretty much sort of consistently, I've worked in neurological rehabilitation and dementia care. And I always seem to have done practice and research together. For some reason, they've always gone hand in hand. During that time, up until about 2015, I did my PhD in dementia care, and particularly looking at how people in all parts of a care community value community music therapy and what they think is going on. Since 2015, I've been working with the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London, but in their research department, not in their music therapy department. And I'm currently a research associate for the Alzheimer's Scotland Centre for Policy and Practice. Here's a parallel, also true, narrative about the last 21 years of my professional life. I felt full class-based imposter syndrome when I was at Northern Province. I was a queer, pop-singing, red brick university, working class boy around Oxbridge Conservatoire, people who were lovely, mindful, open, and I felt completely out of my depth amongst them. When I was working in neuro rehab and dementia care, I almost entirely did collaborative projects. Generally speaking, looking at how people moved between clinical and community paradigms in hospitals and care homes. And so I always felt it was really important for me to work alongside community musicians, teachers, facilitators, and therapists of different types. At the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, I work 21 hours a year as an external. I'm an independent scholar, which is a euphemism, a little bit like confirmed bachelor. And that's my contribution to the school. Within that time, I supervise 3 doctorates. My research associate work is grant dependent, and I actually don't make money from music therapy. I don't pay my bills from music therapy. I run a part-time market research and insights business, and I write jingles, and I create branding for restaurants. So I hope that just shows that from where I'm coming from, I think that we're all performing a professional identity of one kind or another. And we could unpack that, but I'm also going to say that it's not just us that perform professional identities. I feel like the people we work with perform an identity too. People perform being a patient, they perform being a prisoner, they perform being a pupil. And so I'm really interested today in looking at how we all, in our own performances, use music to meet the performances of other people in their roles. And I think I've got an awful lot to learn, and I hope contribute in a way, in a small way. Thanks, folks.
Stuart, thank you so much. And thank you also to Elise and Emmanuela. And I'm so struck already by the kind of honesty and vulnerability in the sharing and these opportunities to reflect on where we are. I have just got something on my screen. There we go. Joe is going to really kindly share slides for me, and this is an opportunity for me to share with you reflections of trauma-informed practice, and starting by asking the questions, how healthy are your values? So next slide, please, Joe. How healthy are your values? How do you know? How do you get your values tested? Do they get tested? Whether you're a practitioner, a researcher, therapist, academic, teacher on this call, how often do you reflect on and reshape your values? Or do you see your values as set in stone, immovable, a solid foundation of your practice? Are there spaces or contexts that challenge your values? And have there been times when your value system hasn't worked for you? The past 2 years has derailed much of our work and practice, And I wonder how easy or not it has been to consider and maintain our values during this time. Or alternatively, has the pandemic afforded us an opportunity to reevaluate, test, and reshape our values? Next slide, please, Jo. In March of 2020, the UK prison system closed to external visitors. At that point, I was working as a community music practitioner on the York St John University Prison Partnership project, facilitating singing and songwriting sessions with women in a maximum security prison. Supported by undergraduate community music students from York St John, we were at week 9 of a 10-week project with 6 original songs due to be recorded the week we went into lockdown. During the past nearly 2 years, because of the restrictions, I haven't yet been able to go back into the prison. The project has been left unfinished, and with no means of working remotely, the practice came to an abrupt end. Next slide, please. However, the opportunity for me in this time has been the space away from the practice to reflect on my values through my PhD research here at York St John with the ICCM. Engaging in the Prison Partnership project introduced me to the concept of trauma-informed practice as a means to support and safeguard both the participant and practitioner in contexts where participants are known to have experienced trauma. The first published model of trauma-informed practice focuses on the 5 values of trauma-informed care. These values are designed to enable practitioners to, quote, provide services in a manner that is welcoming and appropriate to the special needs of trauma survivors. Trauma-informed practice is not about focusing on treating trauma symptoms or engaging in trauma narrative, rather in understanding the potential impacts of traumatic experience. A practitioner can appropriately apply the values in order to work responsively with their groups. Next slide, please. Through my research, I've been considering the potential for broader application of trauma-informed practice. Trauma is becoming more widely understood as prevalent, impacting individuals, communities, and the fabric of our society. If that's the case, can I take the values of trauma-informed care and apply them into other areas of my work? And what does that application look like? What do I need to be cautious of? And how do I know where the boundaries of practice are? Essentially, how do I keep my values healthy? Next slide, please, Jo. Community musicians embrace values such as empathy, respect, welcome, hospitality, trust, safety, inclusion. We understand and believe in the potential for music making to be positively impactful for our groups. We talk about soft outcomes and therapeutic practice, as well as stronger statements such as, quote, music can heal the body, mind, and spirit from trauma. But reflecting on my practice within the Prison Partnership project, I'm more and more cautious of being able to make such claims and can see how the values of trauma-informed practice I work within, while providing a framework, did not give me all the answers. My values were tested during the Prison Partnership project. For example, one week, a woman turned up clearly under the influence of one substance or another. And this put to test what I want to be an underpinning value of my practice, which is that of hospitality. Knowing that her presence in the space that week would be potentially disruptive and unsafe for the group, I had to ask her to leave, albeit giving her an opt-out by suggesting that she didn't seem well and she might be better off going back to her room to rest. For that woman, the idea that music could heal her prior trauma seemed so far removed from the reality that we experienced in that moment, making me question and reflect on these statements more honestly. My values were also tested at points when the women wanted to speak openly about their past traumatic experiences. This might be in a tea break or during a session when a particular song or lyrics had triggered a traumatic memory. These moments of sharing could be intensive, heavy, and sometimes very dark. In creating an empathetic and compassionate space with safety and trust as defining values, was I opening myself up to a situation that ultimately was unsafe for me? as a community musician, I do not have the training nor the regular supervision to be able to deal appropriately with someone's narrative of trauma. More than that, if I don't have the capacity, what does that mean for me and for the group? Were those open moments of sharing also unsafe for other participants? Next slide, please, Jo. So how do we develop healthy values? And what do we understand as being healthy? Wood and Ansell 2018 suggest that, quote, flourishing is the best translation of Aristotle's holistic concept, eudaimonia, which lies at the root of contemporary thinking about well-being. So what does it look like for practitioners as well as participants to flourish? And in order to flourish, how do we understand our role and responsibility and the boundary lines of our practice in a way that safeguards and protects both us and the individuals and groups we work with? If I was a trained therapist, I would be able to bring all the clinical practice, support, and supervision into my work with the Prison Partnership Project. As a community musician, is there anything I need to do differently? What support, mentoring, and training do I need to access to work safely and appropriately within the boundary lines of practice? Researching and engaging in trauma-informed practice has given me a starting point for reflecting on these questions and considering my ethical responsibility to my groups as a community musician, not a therapist. The testing of my values within the Prison Partnership Project has been an opportunity to reevaluate, reshape, and reform them. It's also been an opportunity to understand that maybe values are not meant to be rigid and fixed, but fluid and flexible to respond to the needs of the group. I don't have all the answers, but I'm looking forward to engaging in conversation today as part of my journey, acknowledging that in dialogue, as the exchange of meaning, there is the possibility of deeper understanding as we listen to and connect with each other. Thank you so much for listening. Jo, there's two more quick slides, but don't worry about it now. We can share them another way. And I am going to pass on to Elizabeth now for her presentation.
Thanks, everyone. Again, it's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm just so inspired already, and really deeply humbled and honored to be here and to hear the words of my colleagues already. So thank you, and looking forward to the conversation with everybody. So growing up, I didn't know what music therapy was. I had never heard of music therapy, but I did have many experiences with what I'll call music's therapeutic nature. When things were tough at home as a teenager, I figured out for myself that I could put big emotions into the Chopin preludes I was practicing. Around the same time, my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and as her disease progressed, she could no longer speak. And I learned that I could play songs from her childhood for her, and she would start to sing, even though she couldn't speak. And then in my early 20s, I was taking voice lessons for the first time, and I learned that to be able to sing, I had to face barriers within myself. And as I challenged limiting beliefs about my own identity, my voice flourished, and vice versa. And I'm sharing these moments because I think that they and many others like them were really crucial in leading me here today to this very conversation about the intersections between community music and music therapy. So I'm a certified music therapist in Canada. I'm a registered psychotherapist in the province of Ontario, and I currently work at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, where I coordinate the Bachelor of Music Therapy program. And most of my practice as a music therapist has been centered in mental health treatment settings with folks of a very wide variety of ages, from children up until older adults. And in my clinical work, I would say I've done a lot of what Gary Ansdell called in 2002 the consensus model of music therapy. So individual and small group work rooted in theories and practices from psychotherapy. And I teach my students many of these same tenets so that they can go out and become certified music therapists in Canada. And from the outset of my training, I also was always curious about how music therapy intersected with other musical practices, specifically music education and community music. We weren't talking about this in class, but I knew how much I had developed on a personal level. For example, when I had studied music with a caring, thoughtful, skilled educator. And so I did my very first research in this area, looking at students' personal growth within studio music lessons. And then when I got my very first job as a new graduate at a mental health facility for adolescents, my clients started requesting to perform. I was doing those individual and small group sessions, but my clients wanted to share their music outside of the walls of the music therapy room. And so I started a coffee house event, an event where any member of the community, staff or client, trained musician or not, could get up on a stage, offer something, and be totally celebrated by everybody in the room. And I conducted research about this event, looking at the way that performing impacted youth's identities, and also the way that the performance impacted relationships between members of the entire community. So staff and youth, audience to performer, and performer to performer. And I view this coffee house within the framework of community music therapy, an approach to music therapy that challenges the individualization and the medicalization of music therapy. Community music therapy recognizes that our health as individuals and also our music making are totally inseparable from the context that we find ourselves in. It also recognizes, and I'll quote my colleague Stuart Wood here, that all formats of music making can become formats for music therapy. And so those experiences that I had growing up of music's therapeuticness, and no doubt that most of you have had too, are totally connected to what happens in the music therapy space. And I share all of this because it's always felt that my work as a, quote, clinical music therapist has had these fuzzy boundaries around it. So I'll share, just to finish here, a few things that I'm currently thinking about. I'm increasingly interested in the idea of relationality, and the idea that music is at its essence a relational practice. We can't say that music is inherently beneficial. And Catherine, thank you for speaking to that in your talk just now. We know that music can do harm, but I think we can say that at its essence, music is social or relational. And certainly this is grounded in ethnomusicological research about musical practices. And we also know that relationship is fundamental to client change in therapy. And there's a huge body of research to support this. And this gets me really excited as a music therapist because I feel like a little bit like I have this potential leg up on the verbal therapist because I have this relational medium through which I get to do my work. And so I'm curious about this relational potential and the ways that it overlaps in all of our practices, because it's not just the music therapists that work in music and human relationship. It's of course all of us. It's music educators, it's community musicians, music facilitators. And I'm also increasingly grounded in my clinical work and a commitment to facilitate access to music. I see access to the arts as a human right. And I think that this can mean access to music therapy, but I'm also increasingly cautious of over-medicalizing people's relationships to music. From my experience in mental health treatment settings, as much as I advocated for music therapy's integral role on the treatment team, and I do believe that, it was increasingly evident to me that many of my clients actually didn't want to use their time in music as like yet another therapy. They wanted to learn some guitar chords. They wanted to jam with other clients, maybe start a band or a choir. As Solly and Rolf Stewart describe, music therapy is often perceived by our clients to be helpful in treatment when it is also perceived as the opposite of treatment. There's just such a delightful paradox in that. And I think that there's this really beautiful potential here for dialogue with community musicians, because you folks never got caught up in music being for treatment. And so we can learn here from the practices you've always done as ourselves as music therapists. And finally, connected to this is the fact that someone's diagnosed disability or illness is not a reason to assume that their access to music needs to be through therapy. And so my role as a music therapist might be actually to help them find a great music teacher or a great community music facilitator. Or I think that also music therapists can embrace working from what Ken Egan calls a music-centered perspective, and that if our work can be grounded in the ways that music can uniquely enrich human life, rather than only worrying about that non-musical goal at the end of the process. And I think in these types of spaces, we have a great deal that we can learn from one another. And so I'll stop there, and I think turn it back to Jo now, I'm assuming. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really brilliant to hear all of your kind of contributions there to kick us off for the conversation. So what we could do now is go to smaller groups to have a bit of a chat. Rory's popped in some questions. So these questions that you'll see in the chat now were offered in the advert, the invitation to today's session. So we, in the invitation, asked, what are the intersections of practice and why might these need careful consideration? In what ways can music therapists and community musicians both support and challenge each other's practice on the spectrum of health musicking? And how could trauma-informed practice support practitioners across the spectrum of health musicking? And we just want to kind of throw these into the mix as you go to your breakout sessions now, and kind of have a chat about what's come up for you so far today. We also are going to offer a Jamboard. I don't know if you have the link to that one, Rory. I have it if not, where you could populate it with any ideas or thoughts or things you think would be useful for us to pick up as a whole group when we come back. Right. So can we maybe I'll share my screen then, and we'll have a look at some of the comments that have been coming up on that Jamboard together. I can see here that somebody has written about an interesting paradox. Word paradox is interesting too, about community musicians, I think for shorthand, looking for more training that is health related, and music therapists potentially seeking to demedicalize their work. Is there anybody on the call that would like to talk about that paradox? No.
I think we had at the end of our breakout, we came to the conclusion that actually music therapists, music educationalists, and community musicians, they all have so many different ways in which they can learn from each other's approaches as to how to do things, because they do cross over all the time, and sometimes the community musician needs to pass on somebody to the music therapist because they don't have the psychoanalytical training to be able to process the issues that the person in the room with them has, and safely. You know, there's community musicians just go, I can't do this safely for me and them. So therefore, a therapist who has psychoanalysis, who has training in these issues, should be doing this job.
I can already see a number of hands up in response. Thank you so much, Debbie. Let's move straight on to Anna, and then we'll go to June. That's okay.
Yeah, it was just interesting on what Debbie was saying. There is something that we're finding in one of our groups. It's a young people's singing group, which supports positive mental health. And we're looking to connect with CAMS and local youth mental health agencies. And it's very interesting what's coming up in terms of, for some young people, stepping away from that one-to-one therapeutic relationship is really quite tricky, and they're not ready to come into a group. The group we've actually got is never more than between 5 and 7 young people, so it's a really small group anyway. And now we're having the conversation with the young people in the group. Are you looking to be an ensemble, or are you looking for one-to-one singing support? So that's we're looking at that really interesting space between transitioning from one-to-one therapy into a singing space with others, and how do we negotiate that? So that's just following up on that really, and reflecting how we're finding it.
Thank you so much, Anna. And there's lots of threads I can see coming through the chat. We've got people talking about the language and the barriers that might present. And Debbie, I love the way that you touched on kind of the power, or potentially the hierarchical structures, the people that are programming or putting forward programs that need to think about this. Can we move on to June, as you have your hand up, and then later on I might invite some of the panelists to respond to some of these comments. Thank you, June.
Yes, I mean, I think there's a real call now for courses which cover the 4 things which are necessary to work in this area. One is obviously musical skills, including improvisation, which is often not part of a classical training. 2 is personal skills that are required for, the difference between playing around the bed of the dying as opposed to leading a group of people with trauma. So what personal skills do you need? And then what is coming up now, how organizations work. If you want to go into a hospital or a prison or into a school, how do those work? And how do you get into them? Is it at the top or in the middle? And so on. So how do organizations work? And the other, which I think our middle speaker talked about, which is how to run a small business when you're doing a bit here, a bit there, and a bit somewhere else. And I think often people fail in the area because they don't know how to run a small business and how to do that. So I think there's a real call for courses which will cover the 4 things. One of the disturbing things when I was doing some research was a head of a conservatoire who shall be nameless, who, when I was talking about music and well-being, said, well, we do send our players in to play with the dying. To which I said, are you sure that training them to be the second oboe in the Liverpool Phil actually prepares them for playing their oboe with someone who's dying? So I think, there's a whole area here, which we need to address. There are 4 areas in order to make this work.
Thank you so much, June. And I can see lively conversations happening in the chat as well. John, I will be coming to you, so I can see your double hand there, digital hand and your real hand. The way that we're returning to conversations and a continuum of practices. It's been noticed that there are different practices, and we've seen lots of different terminology. I feel like this is a juicy kind of collection of different terms for the many practices that people are going about doing. John, before I'll pass on to you, and then maybe I'll bring it back to our panel for a moment and we'll address some of the more other questions. John, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that as a psychotherapist, I think one of the things that's also missing in some settings is the opportunity for good supervision, because you could be working with a group that doesn't want you, or that is very puzzling or very challenging. And whether you're working with individuals or groups, I think the ability to be able to understand what's going on, to be able to get the skills that you're talking about, June, to think about the context that you're going into, and to get that sense of support and somebody having your back, and that maybe also if something goes wrong, that it's not necessarily always your fault, but it's an interactional, a relational thing, and to see what learning we can get from that. And that's kind of a model that's more in the psychotherapies as kind of a given, but I didn't find that so much in my community music training, that there was that expectation. There was more of a sense of we should be able to do it alone. And I think what I'm learning each time I have these kind of conversations is how much we need each other and how much we can learn from each other.
Thank you so much, John. I think, Elizabeth, you were touching on relationality quite a lot, and it's come up from Cynthia Bruce in the chat as well, talking about the notion of relationality as vital to thinking through how music therapists, community musicians, music educators, facilitators kind of mobilize the potential of music in diverse settings with diverse people. So I'll pass that to you in a moment, Elizabeth, but before I do that, can I turn to Stuart, who on my screen is that way, Stuart Wood. I wondered if you might just respond to, there was a few comments there, I'm just losing the thread, about the number of practices, the different hats, and the enterprise. Can I pass that to you first, Stuart, and then we'll do relationality with Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, there's just such a lot, isn't there? If I were to boil it down, I mean, yeah, I have too many opinions all the time. So if I were to boil it down, I noticed what Holly said earlier about the diversity within the music therapy profession and the music therapy trainings. And within those trainings, that are the diversity of approaches and theories, and it proliferates down as much as it proliferates out. But if ideally, any training of any type, in fact, any practice of any type, wants to have at its core a discipline which involves the practitioner getting themselves out of the way. And in music-centered music therapy trainings and practices, the discipline tends to be something like indexing, listening back to recordings, reflecting on your musical habits as an improviser. And the discipline from more psychotherapeutically driven trainings and approaches tends to be around examining your countertransferences and examining yourself as a screen of projective identification or whatever. So I think at the bottom of all of these questions, if we wanted to try and move them along somehow, it surely is about how do each of us individually commit to getting ourselves out of the way. Because for me, the point of any kind of musical practice with people is to be able to meet them where they are. And we do that despite so much. And we were to think about how we're unable to do it rather than what we're doing it despite. I think we'd get somewhere, because then we'd all be able to share something about how we ourselves personally have found the best way to get out of the way, so that we can meet people. And that's when I get out of the way.
Brilliant, Stuart. I love that, getting out of the way. And that's been echoed here in the chat. We've had, I think, Fini and Anna and lots of Holly talking about kind of it's not about you, it's about those that you might be working with. Elizabeth, as we're talking about the other and the relationship or the relationality between the practitioner and the other, or others, or practitioners and others, do you want to talk a bit about relationality?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And yeah, thanks for the comments about that as well. Yeah, when I think about relationality, it kind of, for me, the interest in it came as a surprise or an unexpected finding, I guess, in research that I was doing about this coffee house event that I was speaking of earlier. When I was, I went into the project interested in like clients' identity development, and kind of ended up realizing, oh, that's completely embedded in the context and the relationships that people are in, that we're not, I don't think, just individual selves in a vacuum, that we're always developing in the midst of the relationships that we're in. So that's kind of where that interest came for me. And I love that it also, to me, is linked with like feminist psychology and feminist therapy. The Western psychology traditionally has really valued like the independent, autonomous male body, right? And that actually like we can self-actualize as humans in relationship and be interdependent with one another rather than be autonomous and independent. So those are some of like the links for that for me. But I think like the relationality thing, it's important. It's linked to that idea that I said before, that like, music isn't necessarily positive, that we can do harm in music. So relationality doesn't mean positive relationships. It means there is the potential for a positive relationship. It just means there is relationship happening. But I think it gets us out of talking about just the power of music as this outside thing, because I think that music is always done with people. And so I'm so interested in the music-centered perspectives of music therapy that Stuart just spoke about. And I think that I will go out on a limb here and say that I think one flaw from my perspective, or like something that's missing from those traditionally speaking, is also that that relationship is also central, that we can be music-centered and relational if the musical medium is a relational medium. So I'm not like discounting the music, because I actually am recognizing that relationship is a part of music. So I'm music-centered and relational all at the same time. And I think, yeah, that's just very exciting for me. And I, as a practitioner, because I get to do both, I guess, and have my cake and eat it too. And I think to build on what Stuart just said too about that, like getting out of the way. And I completely agree with that. And I think also traditionally, and I know this is not what Stuart was saying, that, you know, therapists, like from that psychoanalytic perspective, are encouraged to be that like blank slate in the therapy room. And we're also, I don't believe we can ever be blank slates, right? So that idea of relationality is that, you know, I'm bringing my whole self to the session. And so I need to know that whole self that I'm bringing. And that's the same for community musicians and music educators, because we cannot deny that relational aspect of the work. And it still is about my client's needs or my participants' needs. It's not about me, but I still am in like that reciprocal relationship. And I think that links back to that paradox thing about that like music therapists wanting to demedicalize the work versus community musicians seeking that training. And certainly I do think that relationship thing, I support that. What Lisa and Emmanuela were talking about too is this importance for clinical supervision or more training for people doing this type of work, because that importance of doing it safely and ethically is, again, music doesn't guarantee that the relationships are safe and ethical relationships. So taking having that awareness of being able to practice safely and ethically, and the training to be able to do that. And certainly, you know, standards of practice don't guarantee that we're working safely and ethically. Like there's still, those have their flaws too. But, you know, certainly I think that relational piece of the work like also necessitates getting that training and creating systems that support practitioners ultimately, so that it's not up to the practitioner, but the systems are really supporting people. So I hope that is a little bit helpful. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And interesting response from Claire Flower in the chat about kind of getting in the way. And so we're talking about removing ourselves. But when we say removing ourselves, what of ourselves are we thinking about removing? You know, might it be the ego or the perceptions or the motivations? And actually, I really resonate with what you put, Claire. I don't know if you want to unmute, but I feel like about being a disruptor and being really loud in the primary school and like pushing all the tables about, and I know I just really infuriate people, but I actively get in the way in that sense and try and get out of the way in the other sense. Talking about getting out of the way, I'm also going to pass over. So either Claire or Feeney, so I haven't heard your name said before, Feeney Cave, so I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I don't know if you wanted to comment. You and Hannah have been having...
No, over to Claire. It's a great comment from Claire. She's because as one of the great disruptors myself, for me to be commenting about, you need to get out of the way, it's not about you. Well, I'm going to hand over to Claire and pick up that great comment. Go for it, Claire.
Thank you. It's just a thought. It's just a thought about, I think getting out of the way, I could feel that at a very personal level in a kind of immediate sense in terms of practices that I might be in with in the hospital context. I work with children and families. I understand the getting out of the way, and it just occurred to me that there is a sort of getting in the way, getting ourselves in the way that is really important. And then I was playing with that really, which is like, I think, you know, in the context here, there's a music therapy service and there's a very rich arts and health, healthcare musicians involved as well alongside us, and the kind of negotiating and navigating that we do around each other, which is a dance, I suppose, and sometimes clunkier and less strictly skillful than other times. But, you know, that's the dance that we're sort of talking about, I suppose, as well here today. So, and just sometimes that does mean kind of, for any of us really, getting ourselves in the way and saying, yeah, no, here's a place. This is what we can do, or this is what I think we might be able to do. Some of this we can do together. Some of this we might need to do differently. That's my thoughts on that.
Thank you so much, Claire. I feel like I could talk with you all for a lot longer. I feel like I'd love to go and get another coffee and sit here for another hour or so, but I'm mindful that we've got 4 minutes on our call. And I'm also aware that Emmanuela and Elise, you were having such a rich conversation in the kind of breakout moment, and I just wanted to offer you some more space if you both wanted to pick up on that here, and you too, Catherine. So rather than go to a question, I just want to offer the panelists that haven't spoke a moment, as we've got a few minutes, if you'd like it.
I'd love to basically pick up on a lot of the things that are being chatted amongst all the people here. It's really, really refreshing to hear that. I think with our work, we get quite focused in the way we're doing things, so to just kind of step back and hear very similar things going on is really encouraging and interesting. I think picking up on, I think was it John was saying about the sort of separation between being a clinical psychotherapist and then a community musician. That was very much my experience when I started off doing music in a community course, and then it was very much learn on the job. So in Bosnia, no training, no clinical support. And with the project Sunflowers that Emmanuela and I were talking about with torture survivors, because we were working with clinical therapists, before we even started that project, we had a huge time to plan and design the project and think through all the things, the ways that we might re-traumatize people, the ways that we might be traumatized. Through that process, it came out that I had the symptoms of vicarious trauma from the work that I'd done before that I didn't even know about. And so I think through that personal experience, the collaboration is really, really important between the therapists and the people the musicians. We call ourselves music facilitators, facilitating people to make music. And I think that collaboration to create the boundaries that create safe space for participants, but also for the music facilitators as well, is really, really important. And that links into the thing around training as well. So yeah, that was the particular point I wanted to pick up.
Emmanuela or Catherine, would you like to? No, you're okay.
Jo, I just wanted to respond to a comment in the chat from Rita from Portugal, and I really resonated with what she was saying here, and a particular question stood out to me where she just said she's explaining that, you know, if she's working in a particular context where music and the arts are not valued, and if I've got to work as a community musician in a context with a more therapeutical approach, am I not enough? And that really stood out to me, and I wondered whether you know, what had sparked Rita thinking about that in this session today. But I just wanted to respond from thinking about the reflections on the work that I've done, and I want to kind of firstly respond to say, of course you're enough, you know, and some of the conversations that have happened around getting in the way, getting out of the way, but ultimately we can only bring ourselves into the spaces that we're working in. And I think for me, the questions that I was asking through the presentation are as much directed to myself as to anybody else. So when I'm kind of questioning if I've got, you know, the capabilities of working in the prison context, or if I, you know, engaging in trauma-informed practice was in part a necessity, but also then has become a real passion, because I'm conscious of and understanding of contexts that are broader than just contexts where it's very clear that you're working with participants who've experienced trauma. But the trauma-informed training I've had actually ultimately has been relatively minimal. And so a lot of it has just been me engaging in my own reflective practice, which, you know, as facilitators and educators, you know, we do those things all the time. And I think the sort of question of, you know, what you said there described as, you know, what you're bringing to the table, the creativity, the empathy, the music itself, you know, those things. And Emmanuela said something really lovely as we were talking together when you were in breakout spaces about, you know, ultimately we're all humans, you know, we're bringing those things to the table. So it was kind of, I suppose, to respond with a reassurance of, you know, we're all on a journey in terms of our practice. And, you know, if we're conscious of those things and continuing to reflect on and ask ourselves questions, then, you know, then we're moving forward in that process. But yes, we are enough. We can't bring anything other than we are.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you everyone on the call today. The chat is really rich. I've shared that and we'll email it to you after, in case you don't share it and you want to read it. And just thank you to all of our panelists today, to Catherine, Elizabeth, Emmanuela, Elise and Stuart. I think we could all give a round of applause to you all. Thank you so much. Yes, really, really thought-provoking. Lots of different themes coming up there, and perhaps a conversation to be continued to be had. Some people have been pointing out it keeps going, and maybe it's really important to. We're going to end there. I just want to finish with a tiny bit of signposting, which is to say that we will share the recording of this event very shortly. In about a week or so, it will be on the ICCM YouTube channel. Our next ICCM, all the links to this are in the chat. Our next event will be with Nate Holder on March the 22nd. That's a Tuesday, our first Tuesday event, which will be looking at mobilising action towards anti-racist music education and community music practices. For today, the S on the end. And if you want to subscribe to our mailing list for notifications of ICCM events, publications, opportunities, then please do subscribe. It's been wonderful to have so many of you with us here today. We are going to draw to a close, but I just want to check with the panelists that there's nothing else that anybody else wants to say. And with you, Lee Higgins, as our director of ICCM, in case you want to just say a quick hello, you're very welcome to. Other than that, we'll depart.
Oh, thank you very much, Joe. Yes, quick hello to everyone. Brilliant. It's amazing to see so many people coming on this call, and these online events that have been so skillfully kind of curated and organized with Joe and a larger team. It's great to see that they're still really moving forward even after the lockdown. So do check into the YouTube channel, because it's amazing the amount of rich content that has grown there over the last few years since we've been doing this. So hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you all so much. Have a lovely evening, afternoon, sleep wherever you are. And till next time, if you are a presenter on the call or ICCM, please stay with us. But bye everybody else. Thank you so much. See you.